So we talked about the centralized model, we talked about the decentralized model. The third model is hybrid, which is, you guess by the name, is something between the two. So we've used the term amongst ourselves, a hub and spoke, where really you have a fair amount of control in individual businesses or individual departments, but some control that's centralized. And I think this is picks up some of the point that Lindsay was saying earlier about not, the opposite of extreme decentralized, where you still get some of the benefits. So for example, you might have your development standards, you might have your infrastructure, you might have your license procurement, all done from a central function, but you're allowing individual businesses to move, or business units to move at the speed that they're comfortable with and solve problems that are important to them.
I mean, like you said, you get a lot of the benefits, from centralised with empowering the business. So, and I guess there's different models. So we've seen where the business actually does the process assessment and identification, and then in the hub you still do the development, or sometimes the development is also done by the spoke. And that works really well, again, because like you said, you have consistent standards, you maybe have the same infrastructure that's multi-tenanted. All of the change management that comes around this is also led by the hub as well. Of course, the engagement with IT is another thing to consider. And I guess, one of the challenges that we've seen with a hybrid model and with a decentralized model is when it comes to, mainly hybrid actually, because you share the same infrastructure, it's coordinating things like upgrades and changes. If you have lots of different parts of the organization all feeding into the same infrastructure, and we have this with a very large bank in the UK, when it comes to doing an upgrade, it takes them 6 to 9 months, mainly because of trying to coordinate all of the different 10 COEs that sit within the business to say, we're going to do an upgrade, and now we have to schedule this so it doesn't impact your delivery and it doesn't impact the processes that are running. So that it can become quite complicated in terms of maintenance, but I think in terms of delivery and empowering the business, but also ensuring quality and standards and change management and infrastructure at that level, there's lots of positives to it as well. You just need to make sure that you manage any change very well, and it becomes more complicated, so it's important to have that.
From my perspective, it's making sure that you do the right thing for your business, your organisation. But the most important thing for me and from my experience is having the correct governance and controls in place, dependent on which path you decide to go down.
And you may start, one way and then move. So I've got 2 examples of customers where they've started with one model and then they're both moving into a hybrid model. One large insurance company who are, first were highly federated, so lots of different pockets of automation and RPA starting up, sometimes with our tool, sometimes with a different tool. And then of course the mandate has come down from the CEO to say, happy for you to continue doing automation, but I want to move all of the infrastructure, all of the standards, all of the methodologies into a centralized model. And that's the only way that you can deploy automation, is by deploying it into the central COE to make sure that we're checking quality and standards. Another example is we have an organization in Germany who are going with who have probably got a centralized model, so everything is centralized. However, they're struggling to get buy-in from other parts of the organisation and take it out of finance, which is where they're currently set up their central COE. So we talked earlier about shared services and saying that centralised models work very well in shared services, but we also see centralised models that are working just in finance or just in HR. And then, of course, the problem is you don't have that kind of cross-department working practices and buy-in from other organisations. And I think when we go on to our next webinar and we talk about top-down and bottom-up approach in terms of automation, the only way to truly get automation at scale inside an organisation is to do both, is to really have a top-down approach, department-level organisation, and then have a bottoms-up approach where you breed a culture of automation inside your organisation and enable people to be citizen developers, to have a robot for every person, and that's something that we truly believe in at UiPath.
And I think those are all really good points, and it almost sounds like the way we're describing it, like hybrid would be recommended. But I want to go back and re-emphasize the point that it really depends on the governance within the business. So there is no right model. If you have an organization that's already heavily matrix managed and they're used to working in this way, the hybrid will probably work very well. If you have a centralized decision making, you have an existing shared services structure, then centralized will probably work very well. So I guess what we're trying to point out is the pros and cons of of each so that you can make your own decision.